Hello, so this is the second in the series of videos giving you some feedback. This wasn't a big problem for everybody, but for some people it is a big problem. And for some people it's difficult to get out of this habit. So I have written more about this on an excellent blog, which takes you through the different ways that historians write. I'd start here. Why don't you pause this video and type in the link and then have a read of some of my online wisdom. Remind yourself about the question, to what extent were Lenin's policies determined by necessity rather than ideology? And remember that we are being asked to explain why Lenin chose the policies he chose. So why not narrative? Well, I want to remind you about the four modes of writing that we said historians use earlier in the year. Description, narrative, explanation, analysis. Why don't you just pause the video, remind yourself about those four modes of writing. So why not narrative? Well, the question asks you to explain causation, which means you've got to be doing at least that third mode of writing there. You've got to be at least explaining. And actually the question asks you to explain causes of several policies, not just one policy at one time. It's several policies over a relatively long period of time. So actually you're being asked to explain patterns of cause and consequence, which really makes it analysis. If you were just to narrate, then you're just looking at a series of events rather than the causes of those events. And you're just telling the story of those events rather than looking at patterns of cause and consequence. So narrative is not an appropriate mode of writing for this task. Now there's another reason why it's not appropriate, and that's because it doesn't score you as many marks. Cambridge mark schemes, in fact exam mark schemes all over the world, pretty much all say that description is worth less than analysis. They're implying that it's easier and therefore it doesn't deserve as many marks. Now I don't know whether I agree with that. When you pick up just about any history book, you'd find a fair bit of narrative and description, and we know from Unit 3 how historians use narrative and description really, really effectively. But for essays in exams, what's required is a consistently analytical approach. And I suppose that makes sense. It is a more cognitively challenging exercise than telling the story of events. Seeing patterns is one of the things that experts can do that beginners can't do. So I'm not going to argue too much with Cambridge on this one. Okay, all that's fine. How do you know if you're doing it? How do you know if you're taking a narrative approach? Well, these are the telltale signs. A history teacher can spot it a mile off, but students often can't. So if you suspect that this might be you, take a look at your essay, take a look at the whole thing, or just pick one of your main body paragraphs and see if you're doing these things. The absolute giveaway is that you are telling the story of events in chronological order. You're using language like next this happened, or event X was followed by event Y, or after this Lenin's policies were like this. So you are describing things, you are narrating events in the order that they happened, and you're not really focused on causes, and you're certainly not looking at patterns of causes. Now, most people slip in and out of a narrative approach, and that's okay. We know that historians do that. But I think the crucial thing is that you must begin your paragraphs with an analytical point. So if you are using a narrative approach, that's not necessarily a terrible, terrible thing, as long as it's happening in the middle of your paragraphs rather than at the beginning. So an action point from this, look back over your essay, see if you think you're describing or narrating in places. If you are, where are you doing it and how much are you doing it? If you do some narration, does it lead to an analytical point? Because if it doesn't, then that could be a problem. Hope that helps.